I had been away for nearly a month, 27 endless days and nights spent in hospital recliners, plastic chairs, and a stiff guest cot beside my brother's hospice bed. But nothing prepared me for the sight that greeted me when I walked into my own garage. My belongings, every photograph, every sweater, every tool and memory and scrap of my life, tossed into crooked piles like a yard sale someone abandoned halfway through. And there he stood, my son-in-law, Raymond, arms folded over his chest, chin tilted with that smug confidence he always mistook for authority. If you're listening to this story, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from. "You do not live here anymore," he said, almost pleased with himself. "My father needs your room. You can stay out here." I felt something inside me settle into place. Not anger, not shock, but a cold, perfect clarity. I looked him directly in the eyes and replied quietly, "Then I suppose it is time I remove yet another man who contributes nothing to this household. Starting with you." He blinked, thrown off by my calmness. He did not understand that I had reached the point where revenge is no longer an outburst. It is a decision, and I had just made mine. I pulled in my driveway under a sky the color of wet slate. One of those early April evenings in Tacoma when the air smells like rain but refuses to release it. My back ached from hospital chairs older than I am, and my knees felt like they were carved from rusted hinges. In the passenger seat lay 2 gift bags for my grandchildren, wooden puzzles for little Nora, who adored shapes and bright colors, and a battery-free model airplane for Jonah, who loved anything with wings. Beside them rested an envelope containing $4,000 in cash I had saved to repair the roof for my daughter, Lydia. She had mentioned the leak last winter. I told her I would handle it. That is what fathers do. We handle things. I carried the bags inside. Stepping across the threshold of the house I purchased nearly 33 years earlier, long before Lydia had even learned to walk. But the moment I stepped inside, the air felt wrong, thick, expectant, as though the walls were bracing for a conversation no one wanted to have. I called out, "I am home." No answer. Not the peaceful silence of an empty home. Something heavier. I should have walked straight to my room. Instead, something pulled me toward the garage door, toward the truth waiting behind it. That was where the beginning ended, and everything else began. I pushed open the garage door with my shoulder, expecting to find the usual smell of sawdust, oil, and the quiet comfort of space that had once been my workshop, the place where I built shelves, carved small wooden toys for the grandkids, and fixed anything the house ever needed. Instead, the moment the door swung open, a sharp scent of dust and disuse hit me. Then I saw the boxes. Stacks upon stacks, crooked towers of cardboard leaning at uneasy angles, lining the walls and spilling into the center like someone had emptied the entire house here in a hurry. A narrow walkway cut through the middle, just wide enough for a man to step between the towers of his own possessions. My name was scribbled on nearly every box. Elliot. Winter clothes Elliot. Keepsakes Elliot. Books Elliot. Personal items the handwriting was Lydia's small, neat lettering that I knew from school permission slips, birthday cards, and a sticky note she used to leave on the refrigerator telling me she loved me back when she was little and the world had not yet turned complicated. I stepped forward slowly, my hand hovering over the wall switch, but not touching it. My eye caught a box sitting slightly apart from the others. Inside, wrapped haphazardly in bubble wrap, lay my framed photographs, the ones that had rested on my dresser for decades. The photo of my wife holding baby Lydia in her arms. The black and white portrait of my parents on their 50th anniversary. The little picture of Lydia at age 5, missing her 2 front teeth, smiling with her whole soul. One of the frames was cracked, a long diagonal fracture cutting across Lydia's childhood grin. I couldn't remember that frame ever being broken. I picked it up gently, running my thumb along the crack. A strange stillness washed over me. Not rage, not heartbreak, just a quiet acknowledgement that something had fundamentally changed while I was away caring for my dying brother. A voice cut through the silence. "You are back early." I turned. Raymond stood in the doorway connecting the garage to the house, his arms crossed as though guarding the entrance. His expression was unreadable except for a faint hint of annoyance, as if my arrival had interrupted something important. "What is all this?" I asked. My voice came out steady. Too steady. Raymond didn't answer immediately. He just stared at the boxes, then at me, like a landlord surveying a tenant who had overstayed his welcome. Finally, he said, "We had to make adjustments." "Adjustments," I repeated. "These are my things." "That room was empty," he said with a shrug. "And we needed it." "We?" I asked. As if summoned, Lydia appeared behind Raymond, hovering in the doorway. She twisted her wedding ring the way she always did when she was nervous or ashamed. "Dad," she said softly. "Lydia," I interrupted, trying to keep my voice from breaking. "Tell me you did not agree to this." Raymond stepped forward, blocking her slightly, a gesture he probably thought was subtle. "I am handling the house now," he said. "We have new circumstances. My father needed a comfortable place to stay, and your room has the best setup. Private bathroom, good mattress, quiet." I stared at him. "You gave my bedroom to your father." Raymond nodded, almost proudly. "He has severe arthritis. He cannot sleep on the small guest mattress." This was the sensible decision. Sensible. What a cold, clinical word to describe the dismantling of someone's life. "And you moved everything I own," I said slowly, looking at the towers of boxes, without speaking to me, without asking, without even telling me. Raymond didn't flinch. "You were gone for almost a month. The room was unused. Unused. A lifetime of memories, decades of labor, and he reduced it to unused." I turned to Lydia again. She finally met my eyes for only a second and then looked away. "Raymond made the decision," she whispered. Her voice shook. She was ashamed, but she still allowed it. Before I could respond, a movement at the hallway caught my attention. Raymond's father, Gerald, stepped into view, wearing my old robe, the navy one my wife had bought me on our 20th anniversary. He glanced at me with a polite, dismissive smile, as though I were a hotel staff member interrupting his relaxation. Then he shuffled back down the hall into my bedroom, closing the door behind him. My nails dug into the cracked photo frame. "You see," Raymond said lightly, "he needs rest. We're just trying to keep him comfortable. You can settle in here. The garage has electricity. You'll be fine." He spoke as if he were offering me a generous compromise. I set the broken photo down carefully. "I brought money," I said, reaching into my jacket. "For the roof. $5,000. You remember, Lydia mentioned the leak." Before Lydia could even react, Raymond snatched the envelope from my hand, slid it into his back pocket without opening it. "That helps," he said, as if I had handed him a grocery coupon. Then he stepped back toward the door. "This arrangement is final," he stated. "We all have to adapt. These are the new rules." He closed the door. I stood there in the dim garage among the boxes of my life, surrounded by the things I had purchased, repaired, protected, in a house I had paid for 30-plus years ago, suddenly treated like an intruder. Through the thin walls, I heard laughter from the bedroom. Gerald's laughter. In my room. In my bed. Watching my television. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't pound the door. I didn't beg. But something inside me shifted, quietly, irrevocably. I picked up the gift bag for the grandkids and placed them gently on a box labeled Elliot shoes. Then I whispered to myself, "They think I am weak enough to accept this." The garage felt colder, but my resolve felt sharper. They have no idea what happens next. I do not remember walking back into the garage. I do not remember the weight of the door closing behind me. I only remember the cold, the stillness, and the strange, hollow quiet that follows a betrayal so intimate it steals the air from your lungs. For a long while, I simply stood there among the boxes, fingers resting on the cracked frame of my daughter's childhood photo, listening to the muffled laughter drifting through the wall, laughter that belonged to people making themselves comfortable inside my own home. A home I had built with decades of labor. A home where every nail, every repair, every scraped knuckle had been mine. A home I no longer had a place in. Eventually, the shock gave way to motion. Slow, deliberate motion. I found a box labeled Elliot, camping gear, and pulled out my old sleeping bag, the forest green one Lydia and I used when she was young, when we camped near Mount Adams, and she collected pine cones as if they were lost treasures. The fabric was faded, and one corner had a stitch patch from when she spilled hot cocoa during one of our trips. I unrolled it on the concrete floor, clearing aside paint cans, gardening tools, and an old rusty ladder. The little portable heater in the corner buzzed when I turned it on, offering the faintest thread of warmth, barely enough to soften the bitterness settling in my bones. I lay down fully clothed, the concrete unforgiving beneath my shoulders. Every sound carried through the thin walls, footsteps, the creak of floorboards, the hum of the television, Gerald's grating chuckle. My room, no longer mine. My bed, occupied. My daughter, silent. My son-in-law, triumphant. Sleep never came. Instead, I stared at the exposed garage beams and thought about numbers. Numbers are steady. Numbers do not lie, do not betray, do not twist themselves into convenient interpretations. 30-plus years of mortgage payments. 7 years of complete ownership with no remaining debt. Every utility bill in my name. Every repair funded from my pocket. A property tax trail longer than my daughter's entire marriage. Near dawn, I pulled out the box marked Elliot documents. Inside lay neatly labeled folders. My impulse toward order had not failed me, even when life did. I spread the papers across an overturned storage bin. The original purchase deed from 1992. The loan satisfaction letter from 2019. Property tax statements, insurance renewals, and utility bills, all addressed to me. Not a single page bearing Lydia's name. Not a syllable indicating Raymond or his father had any claim at all. My house. My ownership. My name. Undisputed. Absolute. The clarity of it steadied me, like a hand pressed against the back during a stumble. Around 6 in the morning, pale gray light filtered through the small window above my workbench. The house beyond the garage began to stir. Faint movements, the clink of silverware, the routine of people. Dad, now is not a good time. Footsteps descended the staircase. Raymond entered the room, brushing past me without so much as a glance, leaning down to kiss Lydia's cheek right in front of me, in my kitchen, as if sealing the narrative that I no longer belonged there. He sat beside his father and poured himself juice. You heard her, Raymond said calmly. It is breakfast time. Let's keep things peaceful. Peaceful. He really believed this violation constituted peace. I stepped further into the room, ignoring the cold shift in their posture. This is my house, I said clearly, my voice steady. I bought it when your mother was still alive. I paid every cent. My name is the only one on the title. Raymond set down his glass deliberately. And Lydia is your daughter, he replied. Which means what is yours becomes hers. And what is hers becomes ours. That is marriage. Gerald chuckled, a low, smug rumble that crawled beneath the skin. I looked directly at Lydia. Do you believe that? I asked her. Do you believe throwing your father into a garage is right? She opened her mouth, but no words came. Her eyes glistened. Her fingers twisted her wedding ring so hard her knuckles whitened. Raymond leaned back in his chair. We do not want trouble, he said. You can stay in the garage as long as you follow the house rules. My rules. A new label floated in the air, boarder. A guest in my own home. A tolerated inconvenience. I turned around, walked out, closed the door gently, Not from fear, but from decision. Back in the garage, I stared again at the spread of documents, the undeniable evidence of ownership. I picked up my phone and scrolled to a contact I had not dialed yet, a person who would help unravel the situation legally. My thumb hovered over the call button. Not yet. Not until I gathered every detail, every misstep they had taken, every thread I would use to pull down what they had built behind my back. The garage no longer felt like exile. It felt like preparation. I did not go back that day. Not because I was afraid, though that thought passed through my mind like a cold draft, but because Dorothy, a woman I would meet soon, had already proven to me that the first move in this kind of battle is not noise, but preparation. I booked a room at a small motel off of Pacific Highway, one of those places with a tired neon sign and a parking lot that smelled faintly of oil and old rain. It was cheap, clean enough, and had a lamp that did not wobble when you set your coffee on it. For the first night, I wanted a bed that did not belong to the people who had exiled me. I spread the house deed across the motel desk like a general spreading a map. The paper felt heavy in my hands, not because of the ink, but because it represented a life I had built one board and one paycheck at a time. I also spread out the mortgage satisfaction letter, the utility bills, the insurance statements. Everything lined up in a neat, irrefutable column. When you have facts, you have a kind of courage that no amount of social pressure can dismantle. The next morning, I went downtown. Walking into Dorothy Clark's office felt odd, as if I were stepping into a different kind of house, one built with statutes and footnotes instead of timber and nails. Her office sat on the 5th floor of a building that had seen better days, but inside, everything gleamed. Degrees on the wall, a tidy reception area, a coffee mug with a law firm logo. A capable woman with gray-streaked hair opened the door herself and asked me to sit. "Tell me the facts, not the feelings," she said. I admired that straight away. In legal work, sentiment is a distraction. Facts win cases. I told her the story succinctly. I had cared for my brother for nearly a month. I returned to find my room emptied and my possessions boxed. My daughter and her husband moved her father into my room. My son-in-law took an envelope of cash I had brought for roof repairs. I slid the documents toward her, watching her eyes skim and sharpen. "Do they pay rent?" she asked. "No. Is there a lease?" "No. Is anyone on the title?" "No." She drew a breath and smiled without mirth. "This is straightforward. You have a title. They are occupants, not tenants. We can start with a 30-day notice they'll be served by a process server. If they don't leave, we file for a judicial eviction. It takes time, but with your paperwork, you have the advantage." Her competence felt like a new kind of warmth. She explained the steps in clean, surgical language. We discussed the timeline, the potential counters they might file, and the dangers of public sympathy turning against me on social media. "Do not speak publicly," she said. "Let them make themselves look guilty. You let the facts do the talking." When I asked about fees, she named a figure I had expected to be higher, a flat retainer that I could afford if I tightened my belt and cashed in a few back accounts I had been saving for a rainy day. I wrote the check without hesitation. $500 down, the rest upon filing. My hand did not shake. Dorothy explained another option that intrigued me: utility management. "You're the account holder on several services," she said. "You can reduce services to the legal minimum. It is lawful, and it signals seriousness. People tolerate hardship for a while, but not forever." I listened, scribbling notes. Every tactic she proposed was precise, measured, and proportional. Not vindictive in the petty sense, strategic in the way one removes rot from a beam before the house falls. I liked that. After the meeting, Dorothy walked me to the curb as the rain began again. She gave me a business card and a calm look that promised action and contained no pity. "We file Monday morning," she said. "Tomorrow, I will have a process server serve the notice. Document everything. Photographs, dates, time-stamped proof. Do not engage with them. Tell them to speak to my office." Back at the motel that night, I set about obeying her orders. I photographed the boxes, the broken frame, the stacks of receipts. I made copies of the deed and the mortgage satisfaction letter and had them certified at a local FedEx office the next day. I wrote a brief timeline of events, precise and unadorned. The date I left, the date I returned, the items moved, the face-to-face confrontation. I saved every text, every call log, and I even printed out the social media post my daughter had already written, the one that painted me as heartless. Dorothy was right. The court hears documents, not outrage. 2 days later, the notice was drafted, notarized, and served. A young man named Marcus, professional, efficient, and not given to theatrics, handed a copy to Raymond at 10:47 in the morning. Raymond signed with a swagger that suggested he found the whole thing amusing. He laughed it off in the kitchen and called it a joke. 4 hours later, my phone rang. Unfamiliar number. A man named Daniel called, a neighbor of Raymond's. He had seen the notice. He said he thought we should talk to avoid making things worse. I hung up. Dorothy had told me not to negotiate, to let the statute do the work. Rationality, not rancor. That evening, a different kind of pressure began. Calls, 7 an hour. Text messages, pleading and angry. A social feed full of neighbors and strangers convinced of my cruelty. My own name tarnished by a single post. The world had decided what role I would play in the story before the facts had their turn. I slept poorly, but I slept. I woke with plans. The day after the eviction notice was served, the air around my motel room felt thicker, as though the walls themselves were bracing for something unpleasant. And they were right. My phone began ringing soon after sunrise. First, a simple message from Lydia. "Dad, can we please talk?" Her words carried the tremor of someone not speaking entirely for herself. I could almost hear Raymond standing beside her, whispering instructions. Dorothy had warned me this moment would come. Still, the message tightened something in my chest. Fathers develop a reflex. Even when logic demands distance, love tries to run ahead and interfere. But I forced my hand to place the phone face down on the nightstand. I let the message sit unread. By mid-morning, the calls escalated. Unknown number. Another unknown number. Then another. I answered one out of curiosity, though I already suspected the pattern. "Mr. Carter," the voice said, a man's voice clipped and practiced. "My name is Martin Webb. I represent your daughter and her family." I sat down, steadying myself. "Yes." He cleared his throat, as though preparing an accusation. "I'm calling because your actions constitute a form of coercive displacement. Cutting utilities and issuing an eviction may be considered elder neglect toward Mr. Gerald Thompson. Furthermore, I cut him off without raising my voice. "My attorney is Dorothy Clark. Direct all communication to her office." He hesitated, thrown off by my calmness. "I strongly advise reconsideration. This could become very public. It reflects goodbye, Mr. Webb." I ended the call. Dorothy had told me. They will try legal intimidation when emotional manipulation fails. She was right on schedule. The next wave arrived by social media. Though I had never been one to scroll often, the motel's silence gnawed at me until I opened the app that had been buzzing every few minutes. There was a photograph of Jonah and Nora sitting on the sofa, clutching stuffed animals, eyes cast downward as though their world had collapsed. Lydia's caption read, "Please pray for my family. My children are being forced out of their home by someone who should love them most." Already, dozens of comments. Some from people I knew from the neighborhood. Some from strangers with no context at all. "I cannot believe a grandfather would do that. Unimaginable cruelty. Sending strength to you, Lydia." Each word felt like a pebble thrown against my chest. Tiny but relentless. I closed the app and placed the phone face down again, harder this time. Later that afternoon, I ventured out for groceries, needing air after hours of being digitally stoned by people who had never once asked for the truth. The grocery store was crowded. I picked up a basket, bread, milk, canned soup, then turned down the fruit aisle. "Elliot." I froze. It was Mrs. Hammond, my neighbor for nearly 2 decades. A woman who once brought pies to my doorstep and asked about my arthritis. Her eyebrows were drawn tight, and her lips pressed into a disappointed line. "I saw Lydia's post," she said softly, but without warmth. I never expected this from you." My throat tightened. "There is more to the situation, Nancy. "There is always more," she said, sighing. "But a man should not put his grandchildren out." The judgment in her gaze landed heavier than the social media strangers. This was someone who had known me for years, who believed a single, manipulated narrative over 30 years of evidence. Before I could reply, she pushed her cart forward. "I hope you think long and hard about what you are doing," she said, walking away. There must be another way. I stood frozen, hands still on the basket handle, surrounded by apples that gleamed too brightly under store lights. I abandoned the basket, left the store, sat in my car and stared at the steering wheel while a slow heat built in my chest. Anger, despair, something shapeless and vast. For a moment, I questioned myself. In that moment, that single crack was all Raymond needed. My phone buzzed again, a voice message from Lydia. Trembling, broken, recorded in a kitchen filled with background whispers that were not hers. "Dad, the kids are frightened. They do not understand why you are doing this. Can you please just talk to us? You do not have to go this far." I could hear Raymond murmuring in the background, prompting her, guiding her. Then another voice message, this time Raymond's. "If you push this," he said, voice coded in threat, "you will never see those children again. We will make sure of it." He thought he found leverage. He thought love made me malleable. But the threat, that was the moment something snapped inside me with a clarity so sharp it almost hurt. I opened Dorothy's name in my contacts and composed a message. "We proceed exactly as planned. No dilas." She replied within a minute. "Good. They're reacting exactly how people react when they know they are wrong. I will handle everything. You stay quiet." That night, I lay awake in the motel bed, staring at the water-stained ceiling, letting the silence wash over me. The world could misunderstand me. My neighbors could judge me. My own daughter could weaponize sentiment against me. But truth did not care about popular opinion, and justice did not depend on public sympathy. By sunrise, I no longer doubted myself. I knew exactly what had to happen next. Dorothy had been precise. Her plan was not cruel, it was strategic. It was meant to remove comfort, not dignity, to make living in someone else's house without permission uncomfortable enough to force a decision. 2 days after the notice was served, the cable went dark. Raymond stormed into the garage that afternoon like a man who expected applause for playing by his own rules. He pounded on my sleeping bag with the palm of his hand, as if to wake a sleeping dog. "What have you done?" he barked. I sat up slowly, rubbing sleep from my eyes. "Change the service to account holder only," I said simply. "The cable is scheduled for disconnection tomorrow." He laughed, a short, ugly sound. "You cannot do that. Kids need their classes, their shows. You are cruel." "Am I cruel, or are you entitled?" I asked. "You moved me into a garage while you put your father in my bed. How is that not cruel?" He stared for a moment. Then his posture shifted into something practiced, the confident bully waiting to see if his opponent will flinch. "We will sue," he said. "We will drag your name through mud. You will regret this." "Let them try," I said. "My facts are in order." The cable company had been polite, a small voice on the phone reminding me of account numbers and service minimums. It was business. It was paperwork. Dorothy had told me to photograph every confirmation email, and I had complied. The confirmation message arrived in my inbox that evening. Service cancellation scheduled, effective in 48 hours. I photographed it and saved it in 2 locations. Next came the electric company. They require more paperwork to reduce service to the legal minimum. Protections exist so people cannot subject others to outright danger. The representative explained it in bureaucratic language. Mandatory safety levels for refrigeration, 1 lamp per room for safety, and no allowance for entertainment service. The reduction would take 5 business days to process, the rep said, but I could see the effect already when the bedroom lights flickered that night. Raymond raged. "You can't cut off his medicine," he shouted about his father. "You can't make us suffer. We are not cutting off necessary medical equipment," Dorothy said calmly when I relayed the conversation. "We are reducing non-essential services while the legal process runs its course. It is lawful and fair." Still, the house changed quickly. The television in the master bedroom went silent. The kitchen lights were dimmer. The streaming boxes blinked with error messages. The family's ease seeped away like water from a tub, and their confident faces grew tight around the edges. On social media, my inbox filled with new accusations. People wrote as if they had witnessed the events personally. A neighbor offered to bring the kids to school and asked me to call off the madness. My past contributions, volunteer hours, donations to the local shelter, the time I spent fixing Mrs. Hammond's leaking fence, meant nothing in those comments. They were irrelevant against the emotional photograph of frightened children. Yet, at home, something else began to happen. Cracks appeared where I had expected only stone. Raymond's swagger faded into jittery movements. He paced at odd hours, phone pressed to his ear, voice lower than usual. I could hear fragments through the thin garage wall. Legal fees, costs, this will cost us. We can't afford a long fight. He was learning, belatedly, that paperwork is not theater. It bites. Gerald, whose arrogance had been the loudest early on, grew quieter by degrees. He would sit at the dining table and stare at his untouched coffee as if calculating whether he had misjudged something. Once, I overheard him hiss at Raymond in a low voice. Maybe this was a mistake. He spoke like a man tasting a sourness he was not ready to swallow. Lydia's posts continued, heavy with guilt and pleas. But behind the bluster, I began to notice a change. In one live stream, she hesitated between words and then faltered, leaving a space where certainty used to be. She took calls away from the camera, spoke in hushed tones, and then would publish a message full of anger that read like it had been written by someone else. I watched all of it like an architect watching a load-bearing beam flex under strain. It does not snap all at once. It bends. It creaks. Then it fails if ignored. Dorothy had called this pressure. I called it methodical truth. There was another move she suggested that I had hesitated to make, photographing the house for a possible listing. Not to sell immediately, but to signal that I was prepared to act. She reasoned that the sight of professional photos could be an agent in itself. It communicated seriousness. I was not simply filing papers. I was reasserting ownership. So I invited a photographer to take exterior shots while I waited in the car, not wanting to risk confrontation. He took images of the garden I had tended for 30 years, the clematis I planted for my wife, the stone path I laid with my own hands, the porch swing we used to sit on late in the summer. The house looked cared for, dignified, and worth defending. That evening, Dorothy suggested forwarding the photos to Raymond. No words, just the images. It was a small poker play. The sight of someone ready to sell something they own is enough to startle even the most confident squatter. I hesitated only a moment before hitting forward on my phone, sending the 12 pictures directly to his number. The typing bubble appeared almost immediately. Then it vanished. He started and stopped a reply. I could almost feel the mental calculations he was making. For a man who once believed he could bully me into silence, this uncertainty suited me well. He did not reply that night. He paced past his father's door instead, restless and irritable. As the utility reductions took bite and the photo message lingered unanswered, I felt something I had not expected. Not triumph, but a strange tenderness. This battle had not been about humiliating a son-in-law or shaming my daughter. It was about reclaiming dignity. It was about showing a lifetime of work that boundaries matter. Dorothy called that night. Good, she said softly. They're beginning to feel the consequences. Give them space. Let them make the mistakes. I lay awake listening to distant street sounds and the soft hum of the reduced heater in the garage. Tomorrow would bring more calls, perhaps threats. It would also bring another day closer to resolution. I no longer feared the cold. I feared only the possibility that I might waver. I would not. The 30-day clock ticked like a metronome I could not stop. Each day marked a small victory in the ledger of legality, and each day tightened the rope around a situation that had been spun from entitlement and convenience. Raymond continued to try every lever he could find. He called late at night with voice messages full of veiled threats. He sent emails that read like press releases, polished and manipulative. He posted more photos of the children, smiling, manufactured despair, and strangers rallied with indignation like a flock of gulls converging on a dropped sandwich. Dorothy was steady, an immovable figure of competence in the center of the storm. She answered the calls I would not take. She counseled me not to post, not to argue, and not to respond to anything designed to elicit a quick emotional reaction. Let the record speak, she said. Facts are patient. People who rely on feeling are often sloppy with truth. 1 week into the notice period, another letter arrived, a formal response from a man named Martin Webb. He accused me of creating an unsafe situation for Gerald and threatened to file counterclaims for harassment and elder abuse. The letter smelled of theatricality and the small-time lawyer's thirst for attention. Dorothy read it, folded it, and then said, "We will answer in court if necessary. For now, document everything." So, I documented. I kept a log of voices on the phone and their tone. I logged the times Raymond visited the house and how often he complained about the photographer's exterior shots. I saved screenshots of Lydia's posts and the worst comments, then printed them. I made copies of every utility confirmation email and every receipt from the FedEx certified copies of my deed. My motel room slowly turned into a war room of paper and ink, but the paper had weight. It had cause. On a Thursday afternoon, there was a change. Raymond arrived at the garage door brisker than usual, face flushed as if he had run. He did not pound this time. He simply leaned his shoulder against the frame and looked at me with the eyes of a man trying to sell me on a lie. "Elliot," he said, using my name like a show of false intimacy, "we can make a deal. I can leave quietly if you drop this. Think about the grandchildren. Think about Lydia. No one has to lose face." His voice clotted with expectation. He believed his words had purchase. "Do you have an offer?" I asked. He named an amount, a ridiculous, theatrical sum calculated to flatter himself and to insult me. I let him speak until he was done. Then I answered simply, "No, the matter is not about money. It is about respect and boundaries. You took what was not yours." That night, the storm of public opinion intensified. A local reporter reached out, curious for an angle. She wanted conflict, a headline, an image. Dorothy told me to decline. "Let them file," she said. "If they have a case, we will address it in court. If they have nothing, the truth will out." By the second week, the electric service reduction took effect. The house hung lower. The television in the master bedroom remained dark. The routers blinked and then went still. The family's social media posts shifted from the wide-eyed righteous to a staccato pattern of frustration. Interrupted homework, cold dinners, missed league streaming games that suddenly felt like tragedies. For every outward complaint, though, I noticed small fissures forming inside their fortress. Raymond's voice on the phone became sharper, less performative, as if he were realizing the financial and reputational cost of continuing. Gerald's bravado softened into a kind of wary silence. Lydia's posts, once bold and declarative, now contained pauses and, occasionally, sudden deletions. The narrative they had crafted began to look hasty in the face of the paperwork we presented when asked to account. Dorothy scheduled the filing to occur not as a grand spectacle, but as a quiet, surgical action. We filed with precision, attaching certified copies of the deed, the mortgage satisfaction, utility bills, and a timeline. The legal complaint was measured and factual. "We do this with minimal theater," Dorothy told me. "Let the court be the final arbitrator." On the morning the complaint was filed, Raymond arrived at my garage door again. This time his face was flustered, and he spoke faster than before. "We filed a countersuit," he said. "They can allege elder abuse. They will make it ugly for you. Think of how it will look at work, at the church, among neighbors." I looked at him and felt a strange pity, a human recognition of the kind of man who mistakes intimidation for leverage. "You already tried the court of public opinion," I replied. "It has been loud. Let the actual court make the decision." He left with a final threat veiled as a warning. I felt sorry for him then, not because his threats had power, but because his life depended on a performance of authority rather than substance. Days blurred into filings and depositions. There were court dates to keep affidavits to sign, and a parade of official forms that made the entire affair feel less like a domestic drama and more like a production of bureaucracy, slow, inevitable, and binding. During those weeks, Dorothy and I spoke more often. She would brief me in plain terms and then ask about my well-being, which I had long forgotten to monitor. Once, over a modest lunch at a small cafe near her office, she said something I did not expect. "You have done the right thing," she told me. "Not everyone has the courage to set a limit that large." I felt the old, rusty part of me, the one that had been polite to a fault, loosen its grip. It was a strange sensation, like finding a missing tool at the bottom of a workbench and realizing the job will be easier now that you have it. The week before the court hearing, something else happened that caught me off guard. A neighbor I had once helped with a leaky roof, the same Mrs. Hammond from the grocery store, knocked on the motel door. She stood there with a small pie and a look I did not expect. Her shoulders still tightened with unease, but her eyes held a new question. "I read the documents," she said quietly. "I did not know. I want to apologize. This was harder than I thought." She pressed the pie in my hands and walked away. It was not a return to the old applause, but it was a crack in the chorus of condemnation. Little things like that have weight. They remind you that truth, though slow, is not powerless. When I looked at the stack of stuffer envelopes, the notarized papers, the photos, the messages, I realized how many small acts of care it took to build a life, and how many small acts could be needed to defend it. The court was no panacea, but it was a place where facts mattered, and facts had become my allies. Courtrooms are smaller in real life than they appear on television. They do not soar upward with cathedral ceilings or echo with theatrical footsteps. They are efficient spaces, compact, well-lit, built for function rather than spectacle. Mine smelled faintly of paper and disinfectant. The benches creaked softly when people shifted their weight. There were no camera crews, no dramatic gavel bangs, only the quiet shuffling of files and the thin hum of the overhead lights. Judge Maria Alvarez sat elevated on the bench, a woman whose eyes read like ledger lines, straight, unblinking, focused on detail. You could tell she had presided over thousands of disputes, weighed countless human failures and misunderstandings, and distilled them into enforceable decisions. She had the presence of someone used to making declarations that altered lives but did not inflate her sense of self. Her power was not theatrical. It was procedural. The hearing lasted less than a day, though my nerves stretched it into something that felt like a month. Dorothy moved through the courtroom with the economy of someone who had rehearsed every step. Watching her was like watching a dancer who understood not just the choreography, but the floor itself, where it flexed, where it held, where it demanded caution. She carried the certified deed in a polished folder, and when she placed it on the projector, the crisp paper spoke before she did. Its black-inked lines reasserted what I had known all along. The house was mine. Dorothy guided the court through our timeline with a clarity that left no room for interpretation. She detailed the purchase, the mortgage satisfaction, the absence of any lease or rent agreement, the date I had left to care for my brother, the condition of the house upon my return. She described the boxes in the garage, the strange relocation of my belongings, the envelope of cash Raymond had pressed into my hand like a consolation prize for my own displacement. Each point landed before the judge like a small, immutable stone forming a path of logic. Martin Webb, representing the family, attempted to construct a counter-narrative built on sentiment rather than fact. He presented photographs of Gerald looking frail in bed, testimonials about the children's need for stability, and speeches inflated with emotion. His voice ran high and anxious, full of tremors designed for the gallery more than the bench. He framed the story as though hashtags and heartbreak had legal weight. But in a courtroom, theatricality is porous. Facts leak through it, and emotion dissipates quickly when unsupported by anything substantive. Dorothy cross-referenced each of Webb's claims with calm precision. When he insisted that the family had acted out of necessity, she provided utility bills in my name, notarized confirmations of service, and the phone records indicating the exact timing of calls. She handed the judge the signed receipt from the process server like the final chord in a symphony of documented truth. When she asked me to describe where I had slept on the night I returned, I spoke plainly, in the garage on a sleeping bag laid on concrete. Dorothy let the statement sit without embellishment. Its simplicity did the work. Judge Alvarez listened more than she spoke. When she did ask questions, they carved away everything unnecessary. Her gaze was direct, not unkind, but unyielding. "Mr. Carter," she said, peering over her glasses, "were you consulted about moving your belongings? Was there any written agreement allowing your room to be repurposed in your absence?" "No, Your Honor," I responded. "I was not consulted. There was no agreement. Everything was done without my knowledge while I was caring for my brother." She nodded once, the subtle, decisive gesture of someone marking a fact as confirmed. Webb rose for his closing argument, attempting one last appeal to sympathy. He invoked community, loyalty, and compassion. But the judge's expression remained steady, her focus fixed not on the emotional undertow, but on the legal bedrock beneath it. When she finally turned to the written findings, the courtroom quieted further, as though everyone instinctively held their breath. "This court finds," Judge Alvarez pronounced, her voice carrying the weight of the bench, "that the plaintiff is the sole owner of the property. The defendants are occupants without tenancy rights and lacked authority to repurpose the master bedroom or remove the plaintiff's belongings without consent. The eviction notice has served as valid and lawfully executed. The defendants have 30 days to vacate the premises. In addition, the court awards the plaintiff court costs and damages in the amount of $5,000 for willful conversion and emotional distress." There was no eruption of sound, no surge of applause, only a small exhale that slipped from my chest, long and trembling, like a bell releasing the last of its vibration. Dorothy's hand brushed mine briefly across the table. It was not a gesture of triumph, but a quiet acknowledgement. "You endured this." Outside the courtroom, the family moved like a wind-blown thing, scattered in their emotions. Raymond looked stunned, the confident mask he had worn since the beginning of the dispute collapsing into something hollow. Gerald's face had gone pale, his anger simmering beneath the surface like a pot left unattended. Lydia cried quietly, tears streaking her cheeks, but her expression held something I didn't expect. Not victory, not defiance, but recognition. Maybe even regret. The children clung to her hands, wide-eyed and confused, too young to understand the politics of ownership, but sensitive to the tension that clung to their parents. On the courthouse steps, Raymond helped Gerald into the car, moving with a frantic energy that betrayed the fear beneath his posture. For a moment, Lydia paused and looked back at me. A memory flickered across her face, an old warmth, maybe from years before everything grew complicated. Then she slipped into the car, and they drove off, the engine coughing and the tires grinding over loose gravel. Victory tasted strange. I thought it would feel clean, exhilarating, decisive. Instead, it felt like repairing a broken window after a storm. Necessary, sensible, but leaving behind a residual ache for what had been damaged. You can fix a house. You cannot easily fix the laughter that once filled it. Back at the house, the process of reclaiming began in small, unceremonious steps. The movers returned the boxes I had not yet opened, the ones that still carried traces of my wife. A faint perfume on clothing, the soft dust of old books, the dents on the corners from years of movement. My woodworking tools, familiar and reassuring in their wear, were stacked neatly in the garage. Dorothy came with me, clipboard in hand, helping me catalog what had survived and what was missing. She unpacked with a tenderness I did not expect from someone whose profession required detachment. Each photograph she placed on the counter, each memento she lifted from a box, she treated as though it were both evidence and treasure. She handled the wedding album with careful fingers, as though she understood that pages like those carried weight beyond their images. I walked through the rooms, absorbing the silence. In some spaces, the absence was sharp. Pictures missing from the walls, toys gone from the children's rooms, A few personal items vanished without explanation. But when I entered the master bedroom, my chest unclenched. The bed was in its place, the dresser sat where it had always stood, and the curtains my wife had chosen, soft, light-filtering, slightly faded, still framed the window. On the kitchen counter rested a small, folded note. My heart tightened even before I opened it. The handwriting confirmed my suspicion. "Dad," it read in Lydia's hurried script. "I know this does not fix anything. I thought I was doing the right thing. I'm sorry. Love, Jen." I read it twice, then folded it carefully and tucked it into the inside pocket of my jacket, the one where I keep documents that matter. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't restitution, but it was acknowledgement. And sometimes acknowledgement is the first stitch in a wound that has long refused to close. Outside, neighbors watched quietly as we carried boxes back inside. Some nodded respectfully. Others avoided eye contact, unsure where to place their loyalties. Yet small kindnesses began appearing like shy animals emerging from hiding. Mrs. Hammond left a plate of cookies on the porch. A neighbor offered to watch the kids for a Saturday. Someone I barely knew stopped by with a fresh light bulb for the hallway fixture that had gone dim. Dorothy stayed long enough to help me rehang pictures, her hands steady, her judgment careful about spacing and height. She reminded me to change the locks, walked me through the next steps regarding the court's order, and said to forward any additional communication directly to her. When she finally left, her presence lingered in the rooms like a pocket of warmth. That night, I sat on the back porch in the old Adirondack chair I had built years earlier, running my hand along the worn armrest. The air held the scent of cut grass and the promise of evening rain. Dorothy sat beside me, her hand resting casually near mine on the chair's edge. For the first time in months, I felt a quiet satisfaction. Not joy exactly, but the steadiness that comes when something long unraveled is finally tied off. We talked lightly at first, about the bird feeder that needed refilling, about the tomato seedlings that would soon go into the raised bed, about how spring always made the backyard feel larger than it was. Then silence came, not awkward, but comfortable, like a shared blanket. "You did the right thing," she said finally. "You stood up for yourself." "I lost much," I admitted. "Perhaps more than I expected. But I found something else. My boundaries." She smiled then, a soft, unguarded smile. Not the polite curve of a lawyer congratulating a client, but the quiet recognition of someone who had seen both your broken places and the strength that rose from them. The house was mine again, legally, physically, emotionally. The relationships that had cracked under pressure would take time to mend, if they ever could. Some fractures remain hairline forever. But the lesson lingered in the air like the clean scent after rainfall. Dignity matters. Protecting it costs courage. Surrendering it costs a person far more. As the sky deepened into twilight and the first stars stitched themselves across the dark, Dorothy stayed beside me a little longer than expected. When she finally rose to leave, I walked her to the door. After she stepped out, I closed it gently, my hand resting on the knob for a lingering moment. The house felt different now. Not empty, not lonely, but reclaimed. A place where I would decide who lived in the rooms that bore my name, and where, slowly, I might relearn the art of letting in only those who honored it. The weeks after the ruling were a strange kind of grace, not sudden, not easy, but steady like mortar setting between bricks. The house regained its shape slowly, like a wound closing after careful stitches. I put the photos back on the mantel, each frame a little braver for having been cracked. I tightened a loose stair rail and oiled the squeaking hinge on the kitchen door. Small, honest tasks. Small, honest repairs. Lydia did not come over right away. There were messages, a few tentative texts, one or two voicemails that broke off mid-sentence. People rebuild on different timetables. I understood that. Pain arrives at its own pace. One Saturday, she knocked. I was in the front yard, pulling weeds from the rose bed where I planted for my late wife. The roses needed attention because I had left too much of the work to rot while the house and my life unraveled. When I opened the door, Lydia stood there with Emma and Jonah by her side, looking smaller than she had the last time I'd seen her smiling. "Hi, Dad," she said quietly. I stepped aside. "Come in," I said. They shuffled inside like someone carrying fragile glass. Emma clutched a stuffed rabbit with one arm, and Jonah held a cardboard airplane he had made from cereal box. They both looked at me with a mixture of curiosity and uncertainty, like children who have visited a house during renovations and are not sure which doorway leads to the playroom. Lydia sat at the kitchen table and folded her hands. For a long time, she did not speak. Then, finally, she looked up. "I am sorry," she said. "I thought I was protecting Dad. I thought moving Harold in here was the right thing. He is family, and we were trying to help. I did not think about how it would feel to you. I was afraid of losing him." Her voice cracked. Tears came slowly, like someone turning on a faucet. "You hurt me," I said simply. "You took what was mine. But I also know fear can make people do strange things." She nodded. "I know. I keep reading that note you left in the kitchen. I am ashamed. I did not expect everything to go back to the way it was." "Nothing will return exactly," I said. "But we could try to be better." Emma climbed on my lap before anyone could stop her. She hid her face in my shirt and whispered, "Grandpa, I missed you." Jonah examined my hands like he was studying the tools I used to make things. His small fingers traced the callus at the base of my thumb. Those moments were more than reconciliation. They were a beginning. Over the next months, Lydia and I navigated a new, cautious relationship. We did not pretend the past had not happened. We spoke about boundaries and responsibility and the quiet ways a person can abdicate their duties by letting someone else decide for them. She accepted a portion of the responsibility, and slowly she began to repair fences, both figuratively and literally. She organized repair days, hired help to replace a rotting shutter, and even dug with me in the backyard, planting a small herb garden in a corner where the sun hit just right. Financial restitution was messy and partial. Raymond never paid the full amount the court ordered. There was negotiation and partial compliance, and some money that never showed up. The court awarded $5,000 for damages. We collected part of it, enough to cover attorney costs and some of the repairs. It was not about the cash. It was about the principle, the way one stands when a line is crossed. And then there was Dorothy. She came often at first with practical advice and elbow grease, and later with dinners and simple company. We cooked together, sometimes giggling over burnt garlic or an overzealous pinch of salt. She had a quiet steadiness, a way of listening that made speaking feel less like bearing and more like telling a trusted story. Our friendship moved in a direction I had not anticipated when I first walked into her office as a man desperate to reclaim a house. It grew slowly, like new vines taking root against an old fence. One evening, months after the final hearing, Dorothy and I sat on the back porch watching the last of summer fade. A soft breeze stirred the tomato vines, and the dusk sounded like a page being turned. "You have been brave," she said. "I have been stubborn," I corrected with a small smile. "There is a difference," she said. "Bravery is knowing what to hold, and stubbornness is knowing how to hold it. You did both." We laughed quietly. There came a moment where our hands found each other without announcement. It was an ordinary touch made extraordinary by how long it had been since anyone had reached for me with that tenderness. Dorothy's thumb made small, calm circles on the back of my hand. The gesture said what neither of us was ready to put into words yet: presence. Life continued its small mercies. I started woodworking in the garage again, building a new set of Adirondack chairs and repairing an old coffee table Dorothy admired. The grandchildren came over more, sometimes for a weekend, sometimes just to use my tools and listen to stories about how things were built when men and women had to solve problems with wood and sweat rather than an app. Neighbors who had once looked sideways now waved. I still received a few cold messages online now and then. The internet is a patient beast, but they mattered less. The house felt like mine in a way that had nothing to do with the deed and everything to do with presence and respect. I thought back often to the cracked photograph I found in the garage, a small diagonal break from a moment of carelessness. I had mended it carefully, gluing the shards and smoothing the frame until the crack was visible only when you leaned very close. It had become, in a way, the story of all of us, a visible scar that reminded us kindness and care could put things back together, though not always perfectly. There were days I missed the life I thought I had. There were nights when regret arrived like an unexpected cold. But there were also mornings when sunlight hit the porch at the exact angle my wife had liked, and I would stand there with a mug of coffee thinking that perhaps a new chapter was beginning. The world had taught me, in the hardest way possible, that dignity required defense. That kindness is not the same as surrender. And that sometimes the people you love will disappoint you, not because they are evil, but because fear and convenience warp judgment. I had lost a great deal, including the illusion that love means unquestioning acceptance. But I had not lost myself. I had found instead a quieter happiness, the kind that arrives when your boundaries are known and your days are filled with small, honest work. Time kept moving, as it always does, but the pace of my life settled into a steadier rhythm. The courtroom rulings and the public drama were chapters that closed. What followed was the long, slow work of living again. The grandchildren began to visit more often. Emma, who had always loved colors and held my hand when we walked the neighborhood, would come over to paint small wooden coasters I made for her. Jonah, who once smashed toy cars together to make them fly, learned how to sand a dowel and saw the grain and would respond like a satisfied cat. Watching them, I felt the soft return of family that was not based on convenience, but on presence. They asked for stories, not explanations. They wanted me, not the narrative others had tried to build for them. Lydia and I kept talking. Our conversations were sometimes halting, sometimes blunt, and sometimes full of quiet apologies that took the shape of doing something small and kind. She helped replace a porch step I had neglected for years. She took the kids to soccer on weekends so I could finish a bench in the garage. There were still wounds that did not heal quickly. There were evenings when she called, and I did not pick up. There were times when I wanted to retreat into the certainty of the way things had been and not risk another disappointment. But the boundary I had set, the one that said my dignity mattered, made a new kind of relationship possible. Imperfect, but honest. Raymond left town with his father a few months after the judgment. He wrote a terse email that read more like a receipt than a farewell. Money shifted hands in partial settlements. Some funds arrived to cover legal costs and repairs. Other payments did not. It was messy and human, and a reminder that justice in the courts rarely feels tidy. What mattered was that the house had been returned, and the principle had been established. Convenience did not trump consent. Dorothy stayed in my life in ways that surprised me. Her legal mind was sharp and steady, but beyond that, she was a companion who made the mornings lighter and the evenings quieter. We cooked. We argued gently over whether oregano belongs in tomato sauce. And we sat on the back porch talking about books that had nothing to do with trials or houses. She taught me to be less apologetic about insisting on fairness. I taught her how to plane a board without splintering its grain. Our friendship slid into something tender, patient, and real. For the first time since my wife died, I did not feel watched over. I felt accompanied. People did not always understand why I had chosen the path I did. Some neighbors never apologized. Online critics found new reasons to be outraged about other things. But other neighbors, the ones who had turned away at first, returned my nods with cautious curiosity. A few brought casseroles. One neighbor, the same woman who had spoken to me harshly in the grocery aisle, knocked on my door one afternoon and handed me a small pie. "I read everything," she said. "I wanted to say I am sorry for assuming." That small gesture felt like the settlement of a debt I did not expect, and it meant more than the bitter comments ever had. I kept the cracked photograph on the mantel. The fracture was still visible if you leaned close, but the glass held. It became a private reminder. Things can break and still be whole enough. It reminded me of the complicated truth about people, that kindness and cruelty sometimes live in the same house, and that setting limits is one of the hardest ways to love someone. Financially, I put the partial award toward the roof repair and a new set of gutters. I invested a little in a replacement heater so the garage did not smell like defeat anymore. I paid Dorothy's office, of course, but I also paid for a small law clerk at her firm to take a week off so she could do something she liked without worrying about the office. Paying it forward felt right. What I learned was not new, but it landed deeper because of the way it was forged. Kindness without boundaries can be co-opted. Dignity without defense is fragile. And rules, legal, moral, and personal, exist to protect the people we are, not the stories others tell about us. Standing up for oneself is not always noble or pretty. It can be lonely. It can be expensive. It can cost relationships that will never return. But living in the shadow of someone else's convenience is a slow surrender that leaves less of you every day. If this story has a moral, it is this: love does not require abdication. Protecting what is yours need not be cruel. It can be an act of respect for the life you built and for the people you still choose to love. The grandkids still come for weekends. Lydia calls less panicked and more thoughtful. Dorothy and I hang pictures and laugh over bad coffee. The house, patched and repainted, smells of fresh paint and tomato sauce. I sleep in my own bed. Sometimes the house is full and loud, and sometimes it is quiet and patient. Both states suit me now. If you like this story, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments what boundary you had to set that made life better. If you want to hear the next story, click the box on the left. Thanks for listening.